this escalation in the Middle East between the United States and Iran, and the attacks started with the assassination of the supreme leader of Iran together with the commanders, some commanders in
Mhm.
Iran. And the war is escalating, is somehow escalating the way that no one could have ever imagined. All these military bases in the Persian Gulf were hit by Iranian missiles. They're hitting Tehran. Iran is hitting Tel Aviv.
Mhm.
And how do you see the whole case of the war so far? And what is the importance of what has happened? And what is at risk in the West Asia, in your opinion?
Let me try to answer the question from the Russian point of view, because it's a part of the story that isn't being told. You have very good colleagues who can spell out, as Theodore Postel has done, the way this war will be extremely damaging to Iran in the short term, and extremely damaging to the United States interests and Israel in the long term, and so forth. And others can talk about the military aspects of tactics, operations, and strategy. Let me go through for everyone listening and for ourselves how the Russian side is behaving and how the Russian side is behaving with the Chinese side, because it's extremely interesting and it's not really being discussed in Moscow. In the first place, I wrote a piece just a couple of days back. Forgive me, in these circumstances, one loses track of time and loses sleep. What didn't happen was that the Russian side, as the Chinese side, knew that war was about to come, but they did not issue any form of deterrent warning. The Russian Security Council, that's the principal military, diplomatic, and intelligence collective in Moscow, met on February the 27th and had what was described as a discussion about internal security. That wasn't what they were really talking about. But there was no attempt to make a deterrent statement. Neither China nor Russia, Russia with a strategic relationship with Iran, made no attempt to deter the United States or Israel. That's first point. Second, immediately after the war started on Saturday, what the lead was taken by the foreign ministry, by Sergei Lavrov, who was very explicit in condemning Israel and the United States for, and I'm looking at my papers, for, let's see, absolutely unprovoked armed attack by the United States and Israel on Iran in violation of principles and standards of international law, etc., etc. What then happened was that the Security Council met again by video, not in person. By video means the president is pushing people away. It's less intimate, less emotional. So there's a Security Council meeting just before the war began, a Security Council meeting after the war began, and no significant communique issued, except that the second council meeting was about Iran, nothing more. One can understand from sources that one of the urgent issues was resupply of Iran. Resupply of Iran. Now, Russia has said nothing about this. Iran has said nothing about this. It can be done overland by rail through Turkmenistan to northern Iran. It can be done by sea over the Caspian. If it happens, it will happen, and we will learn afterwards. But there's been no attempt by the Russian side to telegraph its punches or to indicate anything to deter Israel and the United States from escalating, from the escalation you've just described. The implication, however, is enormous for Russia's own war and the negotiations in the negotiations over the Ukraine war. Why? Because the principal US negotiators have been Stephen Witkoff, Jared Kushner. They were the principal negotiators in what's very clearly now to have been a deception operation with Iran, to deceive and allow the Iranians into thinking they were negotiating about nuclear enrichment and nuclear warheads, when in fact the Israeli-US objective is to destroy all Iranian missile capability, self-defense and offense. Missile capability is the principal target here, as Rubio, Secretary of State Rubio, said yesterday, and we'll come back to what he said because it's very important. The Russian side has known this is what is on. The question then becomes, what will the Russian side do to support Iran over what will be, as many of our colleagues have said on this program, a long war, not a short one. And in these very mixed statements, combination of Stephen Miller's racist superiority on the one hand and warning to US voters that this war is going to take long. Trump is mixing the two combinations, but he's admitting that this war may take 4 to 5 weeks. In 4 to 5 weeks, there'll be a need for accelerated Russian resupply. So what's happened here is a combination of pressure inside the Security Council to resupply Iran and meet certain commitments. On the other hand, there's obviously a faction that wants to preserve the US relationship, but is deeply embarrassed now at the signs that you cannot negotiate with Stephen Witkoff. You cannot negotiate with Jared Kushner. They are liars. They are deception operations. Their commitments in a negotiation are worthless. And since the US long-term strategy has long been destruction of Russia, something that's very difficult for Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman for the president, for Kirill Dmitriev, the negotiator for business, and others. It's deeply unacceptable to them that that's the way the US behaves. We have to look then at is the Witkoff negotiation dead for Ukraine? Kirill Dmitriev is the person who is closest to the United States, the man who's been pushing President Putin to advance what we've called the Anchorage formula. The Anchorage formula is dead. President Trump has gone to war in a way that completely eradicates, removes, makes impossible Anchorage formula. What has Kirill Dmitriev been saying? Well, you look at his tweets. He's saying, on the one hand, supportive of the UAE, of Saudi Arabia, and he's saying to Europe, these are his tweets. So this is how he thinks. What comes out of his head, through his mouth, and should be published is what's valuable. The man has a very high opinion of anything he does as valuable, but what he shows is that he's on the Arab side, Saudi Arabia, UAE, not on the Iran side. This is how the factional politics of Russia's support of Iran, and there is genuine support there, and there is genuine Russian sympathy for Iran, and genuine Russian hostility to the Americans and to the Israelis. So the damage that Israel is doing inside Russia is irreparable now. But there's a faction in the Security Council around the Kremlin trying to combat that. In Vzglyad, which is a publication of very considerable importance because Kremlin supports it to analyze security options, there have been two lines. One, that killing Ayatollah Khamenei has been a mistake. It's rallying Iranian support behind the regime. It's not causing regime change. It's a sort of neutral analysis, but it reflects an editorial line that's not exactly sympathetic to Iran, but not sympathetic to either Israel or the United States. The military bloggers, on the other hand, these are the free journalists of Russia who've been covering the war minute by minute, have done a first-class job of covering the war since it began on Saturday. Better than any of the mainstream Russian media, much better. They're the ones who are reporting that it was a Russian S-300 battery that hit the 3 US aircraft, the 3 F-15s that came down over Kuwait in the last few hours. Whether that's true or whether it was an Iranian battery is another matter. Friendly fire, the Russians' reporting does not indicate. So what we also must understand, and I'm not sure I'm answering all your questions, is Russia gains from this war. The price of oil zooms. The availability of oil to the two principal purchases of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, India and China, their supply of oil must now either come more from Russia at a premium price, not a discount price. And India's been defeated here. India has supported not Iran. Narendra Modi, having made a speech in the Knesset, has tweeted in support of Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's tweeted in support of the UAE. He is now going to have to pay the penalty of premium-priced oil, which he was cutting from Russia. Obviously, China is in a position to supplant its Persian Gulf oil with Russian oil. So this makes a considerable economic boost to Russia right now. It makes it more and more difficult for the allies in the United States to prosecute a war on the Ukraine. And my military sources believe, I'm not sure whether I do, that the price of the restrictions that President Putin has put on the general staff for operations on the Ukrainian battlefield, the price has been removed by the Americans. This war against Iran and any restriction President Putin places on the general staff to assist Iran is paid for by removal of restrictions of the general staff on the Ukrainian battlefield. So it's escalation by Russia in the Ukraine. It's send Witkoff's head back to Washington. He's unacceptable as a negotiator, as is anybody from the Trump administration now. So what do we then find? That the presidential spokesman has said, and I'll finish on this point. Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman of President, said on this very point. So it shows you how angry some Russian leaders are at what's happened. Quotes, this is Peskov talking. Even as we continue to highly appreciate those mediation efforts being provided by the United States, read Witkoff and Kushner, we rely on ourselves only, and it is us who defend our own interests. That's so obvious. It didn't need to be said, but it was said in order to assure readers and the public and other members of the Security Council that the policy will not be the confidence in the United States. The Anchorage formula is dead, and Trump killed it with Netanyahu's help. So Peskov was then asked in conference a couple of days back, 24 hours ago, what's Russia doing in analyzing the way in which the US-Iran talks ended and the war began? Quotes, of course we are assessing the situation and drawing the appropriate conclusions. We are continuing to work in our own interest. Since when does the president, spokesman of any serious country, have to say we are continuing to work in our own interests. What's that mean? It means there are those who say you are acting in the interests of another state. You are fifth column. You are betraying our country. When Peskov says this stuff, he's answering the charge that there's a faction in Moscow, and it means Peskov himself, Dmitriev, and some others have betrayed Russia's national interests in the negotiation with Witkoff. That's pretty serious.
Yeah. John, here is what Lavrov said about the situation.
Of this aggressive attack on Iran was said their conviction that Iran is pursuing its goal of creating a nuclear bomb, but previously the evidence was there that no elements for building a nuclear bomb had been found. But I quoted Stephen Witkoff, if the reason for this war lies in the fact that Iran should abandon all schemes which deprive it of the right, the undeniable right to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes, that is the right which is given to each and every nation. So in this case, I guarantee that Iran will find appropriate movements and forces to reach what the US is trying to avoid. Namely, Iran will get a nuclear bomb because the US is unlikely to attack those who has a nuclear bomb. Muammar Gaddafi is cited as another case in point, someone who voluntarily abandoned the nuclear program at the time. Some of our counterparts in the global South states remember that situation with Gaddafi, and you can see what happened to him after he had refused. And those who didn't refuse, they are not attacked. The current war waged against Iran first risks to mobilize the movement for the creation of nuclear weapons, and not only in Iran. A similar movement will immediately pop up in neighboring states. So, no matter how surprising and contradictory it might seem, the initial goal to avoid nuclear bomb might mobilize efforts to have the opposite result.
Yeah, I think one of the most important, messages so far as the war started, he's mentioning that, literally, he's simply mentioning that the United States is forcing Iran in a direction that they wanted to avoid. And what is your understanding of what just Lavrov just said?
It's a very, very serious warning. Both what he said and what he didn't say. Let me quote what Secretary of State Rubio, so the Russian counterpart in Washington, said was the purpose of the war. I'll just read it out, but you can run the clip if you wish. He said it yesterday ahead of a briefing in Congress. I'm now quoting Rubio, going back to the purpose. The purpose of this, the war, is to destroy that missile capability. He had earlier referred to short-range ballistic missile produced by Iran. Why does Iran want that ballistic missile capability? What they are trying to do, I'm quoting Rubio, and have been trying to do for a very long time, is to build a conventional weapons capability as a shield where they can hide behind, meaning there would come a point where there have been so many conventional missiles, so many drones, and can inflict so much damage that no one can do anything about their nuclear program. That is what they were trying to do, to put themselves in a place of immunity where the damage they can inflict on the region would be so high that no one can do anything about their nuclear program or their nuclear ambitions. Now, put the two foreign ministers' statements together, and what do you have? We've said it before, and many of our colleagues on your program have repeated it in different ways: military ways, strategic ways, operational ways. The achievement of Iran has been to create mutual assured destruction, mutual assured deterrence at the conventional level, because their missile capabilities are now so good, they can destroy Israel and they can destroy the US bases. Ted Postel pointed out the other day on your program, and invaluably, the THAAD interception rates 15%, but no better. The Patriot interception rate's worse, and the Russians have proved the Patriot interception rate is useless in defense of any target in the Ukraine. What does it mean? That conventional missile capability for Iran is now so effective that if it survives this attempt to destroy it totally, as Rubio says the war is intended to do, and Trump has said the war is intended to do this, it neither matters to the Iranian side that they are hiding a nuclear warhead program, or they don't have a nuclear warhead program. They could have traded away the nuclear warhead program as they had in the negotiations. They were prepared to trade away a nuclear warhead program. Why? Because they had a conventional deterrent that was sufficient to destroy Israel. Now, what Foreign Minister Lavrov is saying is only half the story, but it's a very serious one. If it's possible for Iran to survive what the US and Israel are trying to do with missile capability intact and slowly escalate as they are expected to do, as the Israeli and US capability to intercept diminishes, the supplies of missiles are exhausted, and so on. What do we have? We have Israel facing existential moment. They can't destroy the capability they've waged war to fight. If they can't, what will they do? The answer is what Foreign Minister Lavrov is hinting at. And that's the hint that Israel, if it cannot achieve its war aims with the United States now, will go nuclear, will attack Iran, either attack the oil fields, though that's less likely, fall outward, blow to the Arab states and irradiate the oil forever. They will attack north of Isfahan. If that happens, the radiation will blow across Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. India will copy it. Now, what do we have here is the most serious combination of statements. Lavrov is saying, you've gone to war and you will get the reverse of what you're aiming at. Imagine he's sitting in the Security Council on last Friday and on Saturday, and he's saying, are we really going to trust the Americans to ever negotiate with us? Answer, no. Who in the room wants to negotiate on a basis of deception? First. Second, they, the United States and its allies, want to destroy us, just like they want to destroy Iran. What's the only options we have? Exercise more force than and defeat them. What's defeat? Now, you can imagine in the Security Council that Lavrov is saying, we have reached a terrible brink now in which the United States has committed itself to the possibility of a defeat. And a defeat of Israel in this case will trigger Israeli nuclear attack on Iran. So that's what Lavrov is meaning, but he doesn't quite say it. That's what the consensus of the Security Council with Dmitry Medvedev, the military intelligence, the foreign intelligence service, and so forth. That's what they think. Why do they think it? Because it's true, because it's obvious, because the evidence is there. Now, if Rubio is to be understood as saying the truth, and in this particular case, we can assume he is. He said the objective is to destroy Iran's missile capability. How are they going about it? One, decapitation. They've killed the Ayatollah, they've killed several military leaders, and they haven't achieved regime change. Without regime change, you don't have the capacity to dismantle the defenses of Iran like they were able to inflict on Syria. First. Second, they are now trying, the allies, Rubio and the allies, to mobilize a kind of regional war. The Arabs, Saudi Arabia in particular, the UAE and Qatar, are to mobilize against Iran. In fact, that's hopeless. Those little states are already afraid, and Iran's warning them it can get worse. And it can't get much worse for the tourism business and the property boom in Dubai to end. Ditto Abu Dhabi, ditto Doha, ditto Qatar. So if you can't mobilize, you can't affect regime change, you can't use decapitation to destroy Iran's fight back, and you can't mobilize the Arab states, then what's left? What are the other options in a long war of attrition? And I don't have to go through this. All of our colleagues on this program have explained what the effects of attrition will be on the US side and the Israeli side. And that brings us, unfortunately, but let's be clear about it, it's if the goal that Rubio stated fails, Israel will go nuclear to attack Iran. And arguably, the United States, I'm simply offering this as a hypothesis, the United States has been told, Trump has been told by Netanyahu that this is what they will do. The United States has entered this war in an attempt to head off Israeli nuclear attack, and the Russian side understands this. And we're heading in that direction because Iran wins by surviving. Iran wins by attrition. Iran wins by protecting its missile capability and then using it against an increasingly defenseless US-based system and an Israeli system. I'm afraid that's where we are.